Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today's guest is Mike Grabarek, and he helps people and organizations thrive through better learning, coaching, and change leadership. From streamlining performance management to crafting top-rated e-learning and coaching programs, he's led L&D efforts that stick. And we're going to talk a bit more about how technical professionals can communicate more effectively with non-technical audiences and what organizations can do to help build those skills. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Mike.
Pleasure to be here, Neil. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So I know from the bit of research I did on you that you started off in engineering, but then you transitioned into L&D, learning and development. So I was curious what that transition taught you about communication.
Sure, just stepping back a bit and maybe adding a little bit more color to that. Um, when I was a kid, even just growing up, I was very cleverly brainwashed by my dad, who, when he would talk with me about my career and what I'm going to do when I grow up, he was always saying, when you become an engineer, not like if you become an engineer. So that worked out well. I ended off just figuring I'll be an engineer all my life. Went out and got my undergraduate degree and then my master's degree in engineering and spent 13 years as an aerospace engineer. So I was one of those technical geeks there for a period of time. Ultimately, I did, as I was going through, I discovered as an aerospace engineer, I went from kind of an attitude of, if you can't see my brilliance, that's your problem, not mine, and evolving over and, getting hit across the side of the head with a metaphorical two by four every so often to finally sort of get it. Like, okay, it's one thing to come up with great solutions. However, if you can't present them, you will never get anywhere. And I had some hard lessons around that and really got religion around it. So after that, I really found that I was enjoying also, Neil, just teaching people, coaching people above and beyond the technical work that I was doing. So I decided, let me make a switch. I was at GE's Leadership Development GE at the time, and they have their Leadership Development Institute back in the heydays of Jack Welch. And so I ended up, long story short, I got a position over there and spent 5 years. And one of the things that I did was lead a number of leadership courses for people who had their degrees in engineering and they were joining the company. And what I was doing was orchestrating a 2-year program so that they can get up to speed as engineers within the company and thrive. And one of the big discoveries that I had, and it was probably one of the most effective things, was around presentation skills. I learned it the hard way. We had new people coming in. They saw no reason to be good at presenting. And so we would put them through a boot camp doing that. And I had actually taken as many, many times the same things because it turned out, from my perspective, being a technical guy and later on a non-technical guy, presenting is just key. You will never get anywhere with any solution unless you're able to socialize and sell it with other people.
Oh, I apologize about that. It was my timer was I forgot to turn it off. Please continue.
Oh, no, no, go ahead. So you asked about what that transition was like, and I was like a duck in water. I had already been enjoying presenting, mostly technical stuff, coaching people. So when I got into GE's Leadership Development Institute and they let me loose and they had a lot of nice guides there, I was like a fish in water. So it wasn't a difficult transition whatsoever. And in a sense, it wasn't a complete transition because I was still spending a lot of time with technical engineers in the company and spending most of my time helping to develop them. So it wasn't like I was in a brand new arena. I had been in their shoes for many years.
Got it. So I'm curious, what do you think is the biggest gap that you see between the people that come into the organization and they don't have those communication skills and what they eventually become once they're done that program?
Yeah, and just to step back, this program that I was leading, this leadership program, and I was also a graduate of it prior to me leading it. It was a 3-year program in which you spent the first year and a half with GE technical experts. and you would get a semester's worth of material every week, a problem to solve that you had to solve in a team, write it up. And so that was a ton of work for the first half of the program. And then the second half was actually taking courses at various universities. In my case, it was with Rensselaer Polytech Institute. And yeah, so the presentation skills piece, the biggest learning had to do with mindsets that engineers grow up with. I was taught, I think we're still teaching them that you've got to develop these great solutions. All right. That's your job doing that. And very often we get a bit shocked when we get into the workforce and realize, well, that's only step one. Step two is you have got to reel other people in, get them engaged and pulled into whatever your solutions are. And so that's a big, big transition for engineers because they don't see, initially the mindset is, what do I need to do that? Why should I have to do that? And, then eventually the reality sinks in. Well, that's part of your job as an engineer too, and it's a critical one.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, Mike, because even as a technical person, you could be told to do something, and maybe you're just the type of person who would just do it, but you would also probably think, well, why am I doing what you're telling me to do? And yet, when we give presentations, when we communicate with other people, we just assume other people don't have to tell. We don't have to tell other people why we have to do. Well, why we want them to do what we want them to do. But yet we would then say to
Right.
other people, well, we don't have the same energy for other people. Essentially, is what I'm saying, and it's so ironic that is the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just to build on what you're saying, Neil, very often as technical experts, when asked to give a presentation, we make the assumption, oh, they just want to see our solution. And that's it. And so material gets prepared around it. They get down into the weeds and pull together a 157 slide PowerPoint deck for a 15-minute presentation, find out we can't get through it. And so I think very often one of the big learning things is, what do I want as an outcome? Who's the audience and what do I want as an outcome from them? And very often it's not to know all the technical details. In fact, rarely it is. In general, it's more to get a warm, fuzzy feeling that whatever it is that you've developed and then you're recommending that we do, you can trust this person. You can count on them to get that thing done and get it done well. So it's very often that relationship thing where people have got to get comfortable with you. And by the way, to get comfortable with you, you have to develop a track record over a period of time of doing what you said you would do, when you said you would do it, as you said you would do it without surprises. So that's a key thing for engineers is that consistency. If you don't have that reputation, it's a lot more difficult to get a yes with whatever it is you're proposing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And a lot of us technical people, we just present the solution and just assume that it's understandable. But yet we weren't even
Well,
able to always understand what we now understand because we went to school, we got these technical degrees, we then get these technical roles, and yeah, now we can understand what we're talking about. But before all of that, we couldn't understand any of that at all. And yet here we are speaking in front of a lot of non-technical people, assuming that they know what we know now, but we didn't always know what we know now. And yet here we are giving these
yeah,
presentations, 100
yeah.
slides, and it's like, you really think people are going to pay attention by slide 50? Try think again.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean to engineers, another thing that doesn't compute in their head is why would I use images and pictures instead of words in my slides? It's that whole learning process of, you want the audience to be grabbed by something and to be remembered by it. And typically, just straight technical content is not going to get you there. It's going to be possibilities. It's going to be solving a pain point that you've had. It's those type of things that people are actually concerned about and care about. Your technical solution is just a means to get there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So when it comes to this understanding in technical presentations, just technical communication generally, what do you think is one misconception that technical people have about non-technical audiences?
Oh boy, there's a whole bunch of those things. I think again, I think one of the biggest assumptions that is made is what the audience wants. It's going back to that main thing. They don't sit back and think about what does this audience need? How am I going to go ahead and get them to move forward? Typically, all they think about is, oh, I've got to explain this technical thing. Let me see if I can reduce the number of acronyms from 450 down to maybe 35, and they still don't have a clue what's going on. So, again, it's just putting yourself in the shoes of the recipients of whatever you're presenting and really thinking about what is it that they want? What is it that they need? That's a key thing. We very often hear about that, know your audience, and everyone goes, yeah, 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 I know, I heard that 1,000 times. Well, you know what? That's really is important. Let's start with that thing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, Mike. I remember when I first started having to give presentations in front of management, I knew who was going to be there, CEO, CTO, CMO, and there they are seated there, and I'm standing in front of them giving project status updates. And yet I never took into account what they wanted or needed from these presentations. I would slap slides together, I'd read
Yeah.
them, and I'd try to get out of there as quickly as possible. But what ended up happening more often than not is I get a whole lot of questions afterwards that I thought I'd answered during the presentation. So now I'm thinking to myself, well, I said that a good 15 minutes ago. Why are you asking me this question now? But I wasn't putting things in a way.
Exactly.
I wasn't putting things in a way that they could understand, and essentially it was a waste of time
Yeah.
for myself and for them as well. I got the lesson eventually. Unfortunately, it wasn't after that first
Yeah.
presentation, or the second, or the third, or fourth. It
Yeah.
took me a while to get the hint.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, so far all we talked about too was the preparation and thinking about the audience and what they need. We haven't even begun to talk about, okay, you're now there in front of the room and observations I've had, and I spend a lot of time teaching people on presentation skills. My observations are number one, they'll talk to the slides. Number two, they won't make eye contact with the audience. Number three, they throw out all kinds of acronyms. Number four, while they have all the technical expertise in there, they just dive into the weeds, into the complexity, not what the audience needs. And so what I tend to work with them an awful lot on, yeah, we work on the organization and all that and simplify and dumb it down. But the biggest single thing that I do work on when I help people develop that skill is eye contact when they're actually in front of the audience. Because if you are not making good eye contact with the audience on here, they are going to think less of you. It's just part of human nature. They're going to tend to tune out. They will not get excited about what you're doing. And so that there's a technique around eye contact that sometimes I'll spend two-thirds of a day just working with people on that, practicing it, recording it, watching themselves and working on that. But that is, once you're there in front of the audience and you're going and blowing, the eye contact is like if you can master that, you can forget about the other stuff for the most part. You're 80% of the way there. And I
Absolutely.
did, Neil, I did send you an article, a Word. I think it's saved in Microsoft Word on there. You're happy to put that out on your site and use it. And what it is it's the knowledge content for whether you're a technical expert or not, the knowledge content that you need to understand when you're going to give a presentation. So it contains physical delivery skills as well as content and organization.
Yeah, the eye contact is a big one. And when you have a whole lot of text on the slide, you're certainly, as a presenter, you're going to read it. And when you're reading, you're not looking at the audience, you're looking at the words.
Right,
And if that's the case, then the people are likely, especially if there's a screen and they're looking at the slides, they're looking at the words too, and they're reading, and you're reading, and everybody's reading, but who's listening? It's difficult
right,
to read and listen at the same time. And then maybe you decide, maybe I'll look up at them. But then when you look up at them, maybe they're still reading, or maybe they're looking someplace else. I suspect if you were looking at them the entire time, the likelihood of them looking at you the entire time increases. And yet, I think a lot of us, we just think, let me get all these words down so I don't forget anything, and I make sure I say exactly what I want to say. But uh,
exactly.
I think a lot of instances, people just will think to themselves, well, I'm reading like just like they're reading. Did I really need to be here? I could have just you could have sent me the slides and I could have read the slides at my own leisure. What was the point of this whole presentation in the first place?
Yeah, Neil, you're bringing up such an important point around especially technical presentations. We, the presenter, we'll put all this jumble on the slides, exactly like you said, because we were afraid we're going to forget what we're going to say. So let's just like put it in writing. And the problem is that when you put a slide in front of people, they're seeing it for the first time. You've seen it a gazillion times. And here's a classic that I hear from people, technical presenters. They'll throw up this complex slide that no one's ever seen before, and they'll go, as you can see from this slide, that's the first thing out of their mouth. And I was like, no, they're going to be spending, while you continue to talk, they're totally not listening to you. They're trying to read and understand the slide and all of that. And that's another tactic for a presenter. Try to keep the slide simple. But if there is, let's say you've got some graphs, pie charts, whatever, that kind of thing, that's where when you first put the slide up there with the audience, you do not dive into it. You do what we call clear the slide. So we may say, for example, what you're looking at here is a chart of the growth in revenues, for example, just to throw something out there. On the vertical axis, we have on here the percentage increase. Horizontal axis is over time, quarter by quarter. Okay. And you've got two curves on here. The red curve is blank, the blue curve is blank. So you're taking time to orient the audience to the actual content on the slide. Once they're oriented to it and they're comfortable with what they see, now you can jump into the slide and talk about, okay, what's the meaning of it? How do we interpret these things? But technical presenters tend to just throw up a complex slide and just dive into this is what the slide's telling you, as if it should be obvious when you've seen it for the first time.
Yeah.
And again, that's in that article that I sent you. You're welcome to share. There are certain key things that you see happen time after time after time, and I have to spend a lot of time coaching people on those types of things. And it's the same usual suspects that keep showing up, especially with technical presenters.
Yep. I fully agree with you, Mike. I've been to so many conferences that are typically, these technical conferences and people are giving technical presentations. And it's bad enough if you put up one visual, that one pie chart and the one graph and you go directly into it. Just think of if there's multiple graphs or charts on the slide. And so now you're looking at all of them thinking, well, which one am I supposed to be looking at right now? And this person, as you can obviously see, is like, obviously from which slide though, or from which graph, which chart, which one am I supposed
Right.
to be looking at? And
Yeah.
it's just that's why I always say is just like you mentioned, or to simplify the slides. And if you're going to have visuals,
Yeah.
try to minimize the number of visuals you have per slide too, so people don't have to figure out which slide or which visual they're supposed to be looking at any given time. Another thing I really like is if you're going to have a visual like a chart or a graph, give it a title that conveys what you want the people to take away from that graph or chart so they don't have to think too hard about why it's there.
That's a great idea. Yeah, and very often I will use build slides. So I will have like the chart, I'll introduce it, I'll talk through it. And then before I leave that chart, I may do one more click and have it build, and it puts the bottom line or the aha right in there, on there. Especially so if you give them the slides later on, they don't have to go and interpret it. They can see the interpretation right there. So I love your point, Neil. I think that's right spot on.
Okay,
Um,
so for the people who are listening or watching our conversation, Mike, and maybe they have a presentation coming up, do you have a process for them to put their presentation together? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. So what I like to think about, and I love your question on here. And so when I prep people to do this, the very first question I want to talk through with them, beside, here's your audience over here. And then the first question around this is if there's, you can only have one outcome, one thing you want people to remember for life from that presentation. What do you want there? How do you want the audience to feel? What do you want them to think when they walk away from it? All right, that is the key thing. And one of the great consultants I'd worked with years ago, and this even goes to training things. If you give people 33 things to remember on it, they remember zero. Right. If you give them one thing and through repetition, you reinforce it, take the layers off, and they will remember that one thing for a very long period of time. So what do you want to go for? Throwing 33 things at the wall and seeing what sticks, and everyone thinks of nothing, or yeah, there's this one concept and you do this concept, it's going to make a big difference. So that's the big thing for me. I'm curious about you, Neil, because when you work with people to pull them together? Do you do something similar of like what's the one big thing that you want as an outcome and how do you want the audience to feel? What is your first thing you do?
Well, I first tell people that you need to figure out what your call to action is, similar to what you had said. What do you want people to think
Yeah.
or do after the presentation? And then I think once you have that down, you can then figure out what points you need to make that will naturally lead to that call to action. Then you can figure out what kind of introduction do I want to have to help people to keep them engaged enough to listen to my points that will naturally lead to that call to action. Essentially, I say you start at the end and work backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm of the same mindset. And the more you can use a story or some experience or something, the better the chance that they'll remember that for a longer period of time. Not only that, but when you introduce sort of an eye-opening story, when you're closing out, you can go back to that story and put a nice, neat little bow around the whole presentation. So that's
It's interesting you mentioned that, Mike. A few years ago, I attended a stand-up comedy course. It was a local comedy club here in San Diego where I live. And I wanted to do it so I got more comfortable being on stage because I firmly believe that being a comedian is probably the most difficult public speaking you have to do because not only do you have to be comfortable on stage, but you have to be funny too. And to do
and
both,
quick on your feet.
that too, especially if you get heckled for sure. So I did this course, and one of the things I learned in the course was what was called a callback, which is very similar to what you just said, is that you say something that near the end of a presentation that you had said earlier in the presentation, and for the same reason, it ties a nice bow around the presentation, and I think it shows that you put some thought into the presentation because it's difficult to come up with that callback on the spot. It's likely something you would have had to have practiced.
Yeah, that's a great point. And by the way, just you pointing out that it sounds like you were in front of a fairly large audience when you did that.
Yeah.
And this is another sin, So I'll very often coach people before presenting in conferences. And in a lot of these conferences, you may have 100 people in the room. And so one of the things I have to really hammer away in helping them prep is when someone asks you a question, do not just start answering it. Because the odds are when you are asked a question by an audience member, especially if they're towards the front of the room, they will speak their question just loud enough for you to hear. Most of the rest of the audience never heard it. So if you're a presenter and you don't repeat the question after it's asked, then the audience, regardless of what you're saying, the audience is going to be spending all their time trying to figure out like what was the question? And so you've just wasted that valuable time. And so, you get asked a question and I don't as a presenter say the question was blank. All I do is just repeat the question and then I start answering it. And this way the whole audience is we're all on the same page. We know what's going on. So that's another there's like I should put this thing together around the 10 deadly sins or something like that of presentations, but that's one of them too, of not repeating the question. It's.
That's an excellent point. And actually, something that I say to do, or I suggest to do, is when someone asks you a question, you repeat it back to the person who asked it just to make sure that you got the question right. Because there's been so many instances in which you start answering a question that actually wasn't asked. Because in a lot of instances, people will ask a question in a very roundabout way. It likely won't be very clear or succinct. So you have to really pierce, you have to listen really carefully and to try to tease out what the question actually is. So then, if you were to repeat it back in your own words to the person who asked it, just to get that confirmation, I understand what your question is. Well, now you're going to answer the question properly, and the people in the back will hear what that question is, and now everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, we can even dig in this a little bit more too, because you're bringing up a good point. We always have someone raises their hand in the audience. They ask the question, and it's got 13 parts. Each part has two different subparts to it. So you run into that. And as a presenter, what you typically want to do is rephrase things succinctly so you can answer it. And the other thing that happens too is they'll say, like, I may raise my hand and Neil, you call on me. And I go, Neil, your software is so crappy. When are you going to fix it? You may get a question like a verbal barb thrown at you. So you don't want to repeat that same thing over again, all right? You want to reposition it. And I may say something like, our software has been going through an evolution, and let me tell you a little bit about where we're at with it right now. Just something like that. So you don't want to repeat an attack like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Mike. As I said, I've gone to a number of these technical conferences, and with a lot of the people who are presenting, they are postdocs, they are grad students, they are professors.
Yeah.
And so the people in the audience may very well be from what I would consider competing labs. So these are all people that are going after the same federal funding or the same funding sources to fund their research. So they can very
Right.
well you can get questions from the audience that are those barbs. And so,
Right.
and so you're thinking to yourself, well, I mean, I suppose I could repeat the question back and have everyone in the back thinking, well, that was a rather pointed question. Or yes, you could reframe it in a way that makes you look a little, that makes you look better for sure.
Yeah, just neutralize the question. It's not that's you're not sugarcoating, you're just neutralizing the question is the way I think about it. All right.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that, you have to sort of put yourself in the shoes of audience members. There are some members there who are genuinely curious, right? And they'll ask some good questions. You have other members of the audience who they're thinking, I gotta sort of make these people around me think like I'm really smart. So let me see if I can ask an intelligent question. And it's like, what was that question? What are you saying?
Yep. It's like a
So,
comment in the form of a question. It's like you knew that you
yeah,
didn't have no
yeah.
question.
Yeah,
100%
yeah. So
Mike.
this whole question and answer thing is key. The hilarious part is when I literally have people coming in front of the group and I'll have them present something short and then then they'll go, what questions do you have? And we'll mimic it. The audience will ask a question. And almost every time, without exception, that person will start just answering the question and I'll remind them, wait a minute, repeat the question. It sounds simple to remember, but when you're up in front of an audience, you feel a lot of pressure in that. And so it's easy to forget. And so the only way you're not going to forget is repetition. And this is my motto. Like when I teach these things, I want to get them the knowledge first. Then I'm going to get them in person and we're going to practice over and over and over again because there's a simple reason for that. When you repeat things over and over again, part of the human condition and the way the brain works is the brain says, oh, I'm going to be doing this a lot. So why don't I build an algorithm in my head to just automatically do it? And the more you practice, deliberately practice and repeat it, the stronger that algorithm gets. And if you don't believe me on that, do you remember, Neil, when you were first starting to drive?
Mhm.
Right? Drive your car, you had to think about, your first lesson, which foot is the brake, which one's the accelerator, how hard do I press on each? You had to be literally consciously practicing. By the second or the third lesson, you're not even thinking about which foot it is. Your brain's already created that algorithm in your head. That's why we practice over and over again, so that you can go from deliberate practice to having an algorithm that you automatically execute without really having to think about it as much. You just automatically do it.
Absolutely.
So that's like that with the Q&A. You train whenever you get a question, repeat it, in front of the audience. It's just autopilot. And
Yep.
if we think we don't have autopilot algorithms too, have you ever driven to say your office in the morning and turn your car off when you got there and realize you don't remember any of the drive coming in?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we've all done that. That's why we practice because we want to go from conscious repetition to your brain automatically does it.
Yep. This has been a
That
great
that's a
conversation.
real key thing.
Yeah, this has been a
Yeah.
great conversation, Mike. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, I am still I'm working full time at an organization. So um uh, you've got my email on there, right? You can go ahead and put that in there. Um on there. You can contact me that way. My yeah. So anyway, I'm working in an organization, so I don't have a website or anything like that. I'm basically harvesting my skills that I have within a corporation.
Excellent. All right. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thanks, Neil.